Rob also maintains a strong relationship with FEMA, agents, programs, directorate, and Congress's Homeland Security spending and oversight committees, which helps him to remain fully engaged and informed on all aspects of the NSGP program. Over the next several months, which the grant will start moving forward, and throughout the grant process, Rob will remain a valuable resource to USCMO, our members, and non-USCMO members as well, including providing opportunities for individualized grant assistance services. That's the one that you saw in the questionnaire. We call it the professional assistance, and such as personal grant coaching, application review, drafting, troubleshooting, post-award guidance, and project implementation assistance. I think those are very valuable assistance for those who choose to receive those individually. There are also several variables that go into the successful NSGP grant application. Significant among them are the quality and completeness of the application. I think that's something are the main reasons some of those who apply may not receive it, because they have not had a complete application, or the quality of their answers did not match the reviewer's expectation or guidelines. A well-crafted application requires early organizing. That's very important, and that's why we are doing this webinar today, because it's going to require some of you to make some good preparation for the application and to organize it, planning and drafting. And for this reason, we are also pleased that Rob will be available to help guide us throughout the process. And we urge you to attend next week on Tuesday, the second webinar. With that, I would like to turn it over to Rob. Rob, you can take it from here.
Good afternoon, everybody. It is a pleasure joining you today to dive into the preliminary review of the Federal Nonprofit Security Grant Program. I've had the pleasure of getting to know Secretary General Jamal these past few years as we've worked together to advance federal policies and resources to enhance nonprofit security. And this has led us to a point where we believe our closer collaboration could provide true service to you, assisting USCMO members and friends better navigate the upcoming FY 2023 NSGP funding opportunity. Over the next hour or so, I will provide an overview of the program and address several frequently asked questions to help you determine whether the NSGP grant opportunity is something you wish to pursue this year or in future cycles. Following my presentation, I will answer any questions you may have. And also, I want you to know I'm going to be talking in great detail today, but you don't need to put pen to paper, because I'm going to be sharing all my notes with you after the presentation, so that you can have it to digest further. To begin, the current threat environment facing faith-based communities is at an inflection point. The Department of Homeland Security presently warns that acts of extremist motivated violence are likely to continue against faith-based institutions, schools, and racial and religious minority groups for the foreseeable future. The public record underscores the frequency, the complexity, and magnitude of these concerns. This year to date, it has been reported that BB guns, stun guns, handguns, ghost guns, shotguns, submachine guns, fully automatic machine guns, arson, and explosives have been used in threats and attacks against faith-based, ethnic, and minority communities, Muslim communities among them. Prior to the advent of FEMA's Nonprofit Security Grant Program, there was no recognized, dedicated, or centralized federal resource to support the physical security planning and training of at-risk faith-based and nonprofit communal organizations, or efforts by the federal government to bring nonprofit organizations closer into broader state and local preparedness efforts. Since the program's inception, Congress has appropriated $850 million to the NSGP program and FEMA has awarded more than 8,300 grants with up to an additional $360 million in funding to be made available for distribution in the upcoming grant cycle. In the most recent grant cycle, which was for fiscal year 22, FEMA awarded nearly $240 million in grants to about 1,800 nonprofits, of which only about 2.5% were awarded to Muslim institutions. This represents, in my view, an underperformance or an underrepresentation of your community in the participation and benefit of this program. And it is for this reason that Mr. Jamal and myself have decided to figure out a way to work with you to improve that outcome. And as Mr. Jamal mentioned, over the past 20 years, I have worked to actually create the NSGP program, to secure the funding, to develop its guidelines, and to assist nonprofits navigate its application process. And I do look very much forward to sharing my knowledge and experience with you today, and to continue to do so over the next several months with those of you who intend to pursue the grant this year. Congress established the Nonprofit Security Grant Program in 2004 to better integrate nonprofit preparedness investments and activities within the broader national response to terrorism and violent extremism. The security grants benefit the charitable sector, including faith-based communities, at a time of increasing extremism and antagonism towards aspects of the charitable sector. NSGP has become one of the largest preparedness grant programs administered by FEMA on behalf of the Department of Homeland Security. NSGP provides federal funding for security enhancements to nonprofit organizations that are deemed to be at risk of a terrorist or terroristic attack. Eligible investments include physical security enhancement equipment, security planning, training, and exercises, and contracted security personnel. Through 2 grant tracks, this funding opportunity is open to all 501c3 nonprofit organizations nationally. It entails a competitive application and review process based on the availability of funding, assessment of risk, and the quality, efficiency, and efficacy of the grant proposal submitted, as Mr. Jamal made note of in his introductory remarks. In addition, the risk-based considerations, applicants located in underserved communities as determined by the CDC Social Vulnerability Index, or those who have not previously been awarded a grant, will receive some preference in FEMA's final scoring determinations. So the following is a review of several frequently asked questions, after which I do look forward to answering your questions. First question, what is the Nonprofit Security Grant Program? FEMA has the statutory authority to deliver disaster and non-disaster financial assistance programs in support of FEMA's mission, largely through grants and cooperative agreements. These programs account for a significant amount of the federal funds for which FEMA is accountable. NSGP is one of these assistance programs. It provides federal funding to support target hardening and other physical security enhancements and activities to nonprofits that are determined to be at high risk of terrorist or terroristic attack. The intent of the program is to integrate nonprofit preparedness activities with broader and state local preparedness efforts. It is also designed to promote coordination and collaboration in emergency preparedness activities with public and private community representatives, as well as state and local government agencies. While applicants may be most interested in applying for physical security improvements, FEMA will also consider the applicant's interests and efforts to promote their engagement with state and local law enforcement when determining awards and when considering which applications to fund. How is the NSGP funded and who is eligible to apply? NSGP is funded by Congress and administered by FEMA. Each year, Congress funds the NSGP through the competitive discretionary appropriations process. In FY 2022, Congress appropriated $250 million to the NSGP program, of which nearly $240 million was awarded to more than 1,800 nonprofits. This amounted to a 10-fold increase in NSGP appropriations over the last 5 years. Parenthetically, in recognition and response to the significant increase in threat towards the nonprofit sector. The next grant opportunity is for fiscal year 2023, and the funding level Congress will appropriate for the next coming cycle has not yet been determined, but Congress is considering increasing the level up to $360 million, or a $70 million increase over this past year. The start date for the next application period will be established after Congress finalizes the pending appropriations, including for the Homeland Security spending bill that supports NSGP. The timing of congressional action has been delayed until December 16th, which is about 2.5 months past the point where they were supposed to begin the fiscal year. This means the earliest the next funding opportunity can commence is in mid-February, although that date could slip further if Congress chooses to delay spending decisions into the new year. But the longer Congress delays, the shorter the grant application period will be. For this reason, it is imperative that interested organizations begin application preparations well ahead of the official NSGP application start date. The Department of Homeland Security awards grants on a competitive basis to 501c3 designated nonprofits and tax-exempt places of worship, such as churches, synagogues, and mosques determined to be at risk of terrorist or terroristic attacks. The program operates under two funding sources. One funding source goes to nonprofits specifically located within high-risk designated urban areas, and that is designated by FEMA. The second funding source is available to every other nonprofit located in any other community. An organization's physical address will determine which program option is applicable to them, and the list of designated high-risk urban areas will be published in the grant guidance when it comes out at the time that FEMA starts the next grant funding opportunity, and we will make that known at that time. What can the grants be used for? The funds are intended to protect life and property by enhancing physical security, conducting preparedness planning, training and exercises, and contracting with security personnel. Grant recipients commonly use the funds for security upgrades such as security surveillance cameras and CCTV equipment, controlled entry and access systems, security enhanced doors and windows, alarms, alerts, and notification systems, blast-proof doors and windows, and physical barriers, fencing, or bollards. There are more than 30 eligible categories of approved equipment and activities, but only those approved categories can be funded through the NSGP grant. What are the permissible levels of funding? Awards are currently capped as follows. Sub-applicants, which are the nonprofits, with one site may apply up to $150,000 for that site. The site must be in existence and occupied by the nonprofit at the time they submit their application. If the site is under construction or is unoccupied at the time of application, then that applicant would not be eligible to apply for this cycle. Also, sub-applicants with multiple sites may apply for up to 3 separate locations, with each site receiving up to $150,000 for a maximum award of $450,000. In the case of multiple sites, each site would have to submit its own application, provide all the requested supporting documents, and satisfy all application requirements and meet all standards and limitations in the same way a loan applicant would have to submit for a single site. FEMA sets the period of program performance for a grant at 36 months. However, the state may choose at its discretion to shorten the period of performance. And when that happens, it's usually for about 24 months. The NSGP program functions as a reimbursement model. Once approved to implement projects, the nonprofits are responsible for paying their vendors directly and subsequently submitting reimbursement requests for repayment. Only eligible costs approved in the applicant's notice of award will be subject to reimbursement. How does the application process work? Nonprofit organizations apply through their state administrative agency, which is typically the state Homeland Security and Emergency Management Entity. The SAA conducts first stage review of the applications and submits them to FEMA for a second multi-stage federal review. The SAAs administer the program locally, and they are the primary points of contact for the nonprofit applicants. FEMA administers the overall program nationally, undertakes several reviews, checks, and assessments, and makes funding recommendations to the Secretary of Homeland Security. And it is the Secretary of Homeland Security who actually makes the final award decisions. Once the state administrative agencies are notified of the results, they have 45 days within which to notify the applicants in their jurisdictions who secured awards. And over the course of project implementation, they are the ones responsible for ensuring applicants comply with all program terms and conditions. Throughout the application, the post-award and implementation processes, the applicant's primary point of contact for all instruction and guidance is the state administrative agency. The applicant should have no direct contact with FEMA except in the most limited circumstances. What supportive documentation does an applicant need to provide? The SAA will instruct applicants on what and when they will need to submit. In general, the application package will include an application form called an investment justification, which will be available in as a PDF format. They will need to provide and have a vulnerability assessment, which is a tool upon which the investments requested in the application are based and substantiated. The applicant's mission statement, which and also any mission implementation policies or practices that may elevate the organization's risk, as well as any other documentation substantiating the applicant's elevated risk, such as past threat incidents directed at it or a similarly situated organization. And the SAA may, in its discretion, also seek additional information. How will the application be evaluated? All applications go through a competitive state and federal review and scoring process. The criteria they will use to evaluate the application includes the identification and substantiation of current and persistent threats or attacks from within or outside the United States by a terrorist organization, network, or cell against the applicant or a similar institution based on the applicant's ideology, beliefs, or mission. The symbolic value of the sites as a highly recognized local, national, or historic institution, the role of the applicant in responding to or recovering from a terrorist attack or other man-made or natural hazard, findings from previously conducted vulnerability assessment, as we mentioned, integration of nonprofit preparedness with broader state and local preparedness efforts, and a complete and feasible application that addresses identified risks and the impacts a threat event could have on the applicant through a threat event, and the investments made to address the threats and vulnerabilities assessed. What are the key dates and deadlines? All key dates and deadlines will be set forth in FEMA's grant announcement called a Notice of Funding Opportunity, or NOFO. FEMA will post the NOFO approximately 60 days after Congress appropriates funding for the Nonprofit Security Grant Program within the annual discretionary Homeland Security spending bill. The NOFO will set forth when the SAA must complete its first stage review of the applications, which in recent cycles has been within about 30 days of the grant notification. And within that time frame, the SAAs will establish a deadline within which the nonprofits located in their jurisdictions will be required to complete and submit their application packages. In recent cycles, including the last one, that can be as short as 7 to 10 days. The timelines may differ also between states, and therefore it is all applicants should always check in with their SAAs about the deadlines that they set. So FEMA must make final award recommendations, and DHS must make final award decisions before the start of the next fiscal year, which begins on October 1st. And I underscore again that these deadlines are very condensed because Congress is almost always late in funding the program, as they are today or this year. But FEMA still must meet its statutory deadline requirements set by Congress, regardless of when Congress actually appropriates the funds. And it is for these reasons why we're meeting today so far ahead of the next grant cycle, because early drafting in advance of the applications is critical to a successful submission, and also just makes the process that much easier. Because as Mr. Jamal had mentioned, it could come across as very complicated, and what we want to do is simplify this process for you, which is the subject of our next webinar, not today. So going on, what are the recommended preliminary steps to apply? And I've listed 5. First, identify the state administrative agency. The SAA administers the program to the nonprofit applicants. They will provide applicants with all instructions and set any state or local guidelines they may modify or add to the federal requirements. This includes establishing the deadlines to receive applications. Instructions and timelines may also vary between SAAs, as I've mentioned. 2, complete a vulnerability assessment. Obtaining an assessment is key to moving forward with the application. Information provided within the vulnerability assessment will help to satisfy questions in the application pertaining to the threats, vulnerabilities, and consequences of a terrorist or terrorist attack targeting the applicant's facility, and the recommendations for investments requested to be funded within the application. And there are basically 3 approaches to obtaining a vulnerability assessment. First, obtaining a professional assessment conducted at no cost by a state or local law enforcement official, or possibly a Department of Homeland Security protective security advisor, or hiring a private sector vendor. Vendors may vary in cost and quality and competency, so it's advisable to vet and conduct your due diligence on any prospective vendors you would hire to do a vulnerability assessment, and conducting a self-assessment at no cost. And the Department of Homeland Security has developed such a self-assessment that can be used to advance the NSGP application. Obtaining a professional assessment is the best practice and one that FEMA prefers. It is more likely an applicant will secure a professional assessment if they act early. All assessors, whether professional, a hired vendor, or self-assessed, should familiarize themselves with the questions provided in the application so that their findings and recommendations provided within their vulnerability assessment can be set in a way that will be easier to utilize when completing the application. So in other words, the vulnerability assessment report should flow with the application's 2 or 3 sections pertaining to the vulnerability assessment itself. 3, obtain cost estimates for potential investments. To ensure there's enough time to complete the application, it is also important as soon as possible and after the vulnerability assessment is completed for an applicant to obtain general cost estimates for each of the investments identified in the vulnerability assessment that will be requested in the grant application. To accomplish this, an applicant needs to identify potential vendors or sources for products and services, One way to do that is to check with peers or local security advisors for recommendations of reputable vendors. It is advised to get 2 or 3 quotes if available for products and services to establish costs to put into the grant application where instructed, and to ensure the quotes include installation, maintenance, and service costs, knowing that the project will commence, between 6 and 9 months from the date of application, and it's important to factor in potential inflation, and to prioritize investment requests within the organization, meaning discuss security measures within your organization's leadership to identify the most suitable solutions for the organization to be on the same page about what investments it wants to seek and implement through the application. And an applicant should not contract with a vendor or commit to their doing any work on the project at the time of the application development. Competitive bids for products and services should be conducted during project implementation, during the post-award process. The task at this point is just really to get a general cost estimate. 4, draft an application for the investment justification. Time is of the essence, and the application period, as we've mentioned, can be as short as 7 to 10 days. And most of the application drafting can be done now, well in advance of FEMA's official release date of the application guidance. The earlier you prepare, the easier it will be to navigate the overall application process, and it'll be much less stressful. And then finally, obtaining a unique entity identification number to do business with the federal government, including for the nonprofit security grant program. Every applicant must apply for a unique entity ID, and there are simple instructions to do that, which I will provide. What if the NSGP grant is not a good fit for you? The NSGP grant opportunity may not be for everybody. Whether intending to apply for the NSGP grant or not, it is advisable that all faith and charitable sector organizations still familiarize themselves with safety and security best practices and assess their security needs. And I would recommend taking advantage of information that's provided on the DHS Center for Faith-Based and Neighborhood Partnerships, which provides several resources on this subject matter. And in my written remarks, I provide the web address for that. So Mr. Jamal mentioned what I do and what I can do for you. And basically, as Mr. Jamal said, the aspect of this whole process that the nonprofit applicant can control the most is the development of a strong and compelling application, and satisfying that factor is where my assistance comes into play. So with that, I know I spoke quickly. Many of you may have fallen asleep, but the good news is that I have all of this detailed in writing, and I will share that with Mr. Jamal, who can then forward that to you along with a copy of or recording of this session. So with that, Mr. Jamal, I'm available to answer questions from the field.
Thank you, Rob. It was really an eye-opener for what you have presented to us today. We really appreciate it. Thank you very much. I'm going to now open, the floor for some questions that we have received, and also I want to make sure that we do have, all the questions been answered. So please, those who have questions, go ahead and post them. We're going to be looking at those, questions that you are posting up here. A couple of things that I should mention that, my background is the same as the one that we sent out in the email, so that people recognize this is the webinar that we did mention about the NSGP. So just to give everybody, I'm not FEMA, I'm not DHS. This is just to let people know this is the webinar about the subject that we sent in the email. Now we have a questions here. It says that what if you have a co-located organizations, meaning like if there is a mosque and there is a school and they are in the same premise, would they apply for two facilities or one facility? Does each one submit their application, or how that can be managed?
So the short answer is one application, one location. So if the school is located in the mosque, they could discuss whether or not the mosque should apply on behalf of both organizations, or if the mosque chooses not to apply, to give permission for the school to apply on its own behalf. But it'd be one application for one location, and the investment sought could be a combination, and there'd be one vulnerability assessment, and there might be two combined missions, though, mission statements, and they may provide supporting documentation if one or the other may have been a threat in the past. But the simple answer is one location, one application.
Okay, thank you. I should say that, sometimes, like for instance, schools, they have different set of concerns than a mosque. A mosque, they have only certain times that they go to pray, although even if nobody is there, somebody may attack, okay? And of course, Friday is an attractive time because there are a lot of people there. The school is a daily. The school involves children, it involves parents, and may involve even having security all the time as the school is operating. So would you suggest that they go with the highest risk and include that? Because one maybe they're all at risk, but one is higher than the other. So they need to probably apply and include the highest risk entity so that they will be able to be covered instead of being less covered in terms of their security. What do you think?
Well, that's certainly, I think, a logical conclusion, but I refer back to the vulnerability assessment. Everything begins and ends with the vulnerability assessment. The vulnerability assessment will identify the various scenarios that you're talking about, and with the physical plant in mind, will provide the type of will identify the weaknesses and should make the recommendations for the type of investments that they would seek during through the application. So it should be a logical continuum from the vulnerability assessment, identifying the very scenarios you discussed, which could be perhaps on Fridays the mosque is most at risk, but during 5 days a week the school may be most at risk for these reasons. These are the vulnerabilities at the mosque. These are the vulnerabilities at the adjoining school or the basement, and then the determination would be to prioritize, because maybe the investment justification offers 10 recommendations, and in total those recommendations exceed the $150,000 cap. And maybe, well, of those 10, what are the 5 or 6 most essential investments that bring us under that cap? And that is what you apply for this year. And then maybe another year you apply for the remaining 4 or 5, investments that were not taken care of through the application, or maybe they're paid for through private sector dollars that, just this percentage could be paid for through the grant and this through other means. And some states, they also have state grant programs that might be able to make up the different. So in Chicago, for example, there's a new state program that I believe was funded at $20 million this year. So I don't have the specifics, but an applicant could apply for up to $150,000 for the federal grant, and then some additional resources through the state grant. Or if they didn't secure money through the federal grant, maybe they can just simply apply for the state funding. So there's options depending.
Thank you. Well, this subject was really brought up. Can they do double dip? Can they go to the federal and can they go as well as to the state? So you're saying yes, they can.
Absolutely. With the parenthetical that each state grant program is different than the next. So you'd have to look at the particulars. There's about 12 or 13 states and some localities that have their own grant program. Some of them are as simple as, if you must apply for the federal grant, and then we use the federal application as our own application, you just forward us that application. Others may say, if you applied for but failed to secure a federal grant, we're going to give you priority under the state grant. Or the state grant might say the federal grant is limited to these 5 areas, the federal grant, but the state grant is more flexible, where the federal grant may have more of a terrorism extremist focus. A state grant may have more of a hate crimes response focus. So there's variables, but to the double dipping, I don't know any state grant that doesn't allow you to also apply for the federal. They may just give a preference to someone who didn't get a state grant or federal grant, excuse me. So
thank you. Yeah, because that was actually last weekend we had some discussion and some suggested, no, you cannot apply for both. But what you're saying there, you can. It depends just how each grant been designed for and what are the eligibility requirements for it. It may vary, but you can, as long as you have what it takes or you have the justification to apply for.
Correct.
Okay. Now, other question here, and also to the benefit of our audience here, some of them are mosques. They are non-for-profit Islamic organizations, known to be Islamic organizations, and unfortunately, the state of hate, if I may use that word, is high these days, and makes a lot of religious groups, vulnerable to hate crimes and terrorism and all kind of things. And so it may not be confined. This threat may not be confined only to places of worship, but also to non-for-profit religious organizations. It could be a relief organization. It could be an institution that does some other types, but known, and perpetrators may know those are related to a certain faith group. Would those entities be eligible, or can they apply for these grants?
They would be eligible. Any 501c3 organization or faith-based organization that's exempt under IRS regulations can apply. Okay. There are preferences within the scoring for organizations that are clearly of a faith-based nature, such as a mosque or Islamic center. But it's all in what your mission statement says. It's all what you write in your background section. It's all how you present the threats that might be posed to your type of organization that helps navigate scoring biases that are built in within the application. So unbeknownst to some, let's say, Muslim nonprofit organization that's applying, they may unwittingly apply and then will be deemed to be more of a general type of nonprofit than a faith-based organization. and they will be at a huge disadvantage in the final scoring because all scores are adjusted at the end. The raw scores are all adjusted at the end.
Mhm.
And if you're not in the highest sort of category of adjustment, you fall well down into the scoring. Now, I mentioned that we're expecting somewhere upwards of $360 million to be distributed through the grant, which helps those lower scorers make because the way it's scored is the money keeps going around and around, at least in the urban area security initiative, until money is done. In the other program called Nonprofit Security State Program, which is for everybody else, each state gets a target amount of money. And the more money that is generally available, the more money each state will be targeted. We'll have a target allocation, which then expands the potential pool of participants. But what we will do is work with every nonprofit to maximize, to get them to look like, because of their ideology and beliefs and for what they do and who they are, makes them more likely than not to be a target. And that's how we work our way through the scoring. So the simple answer is yes, any nonprofit 501c3 can apply. And we have strategies for working with non-mosques to make sure that they have as strong a case as they can.
Thank you. That is very important because we do know some places, the name kind of, immediately tells you, oh, this is a religious-based, faith-based organization, just by their name, and probably, yes, in their mission also that they serve, Muslims or this or that, or Christians or Jew, whatever that is, although it may not be a mosque or a synagogue or a church, but an office building that they have these activities going on. Yeah.
There are several questions from yes, no, to room for one sentence to whole paragraphs buried within the application that addresses this very issue. And it's how you respond to those questions, even if it's a yes or no, your mission statement, and these other aspects of the IG get to this. And it's what the reviewers are looking for. And we know this, thankfully, from experience. And that is where sort of the drafting guidance comes into play. And next week when we meet, I hope to have more slides. Was my slide up? I don't remember if it was even up.
Oh, let me make sure that it is up. I'm sorry.
Well, it will be in the document that we circulate. So in the PowerPoint, I'm a font of knowledge, as Mr. Jamal knows. I'm not the most technical PowerPoint guy, so I'm going to try to be a little more sophisticated next week as we walk. There are 7 sections to the investment justification. There are about 14 questions, and several of the questions do relate to this discussion that we're talking about, is how you elevate the nonprofit, because who they are, into a category of to be considered particularly at risk. And we have strategy. We'll talk about strategies about that next week, and where we will define that.
Okay. I have a question here. It says, can you include the cost of the assessment and the application?
No. No pre-award costs can be included in the to be reimbursed. There is nothing backward reimbursable. So if you've already put in a camera today, you can't seek reimbursement for that camera that's already in place. If you pay for a vulnerability assessment, that's on you. If you pay for assistance with the grant, it's on you. That's just how it is. Even after you receive a notice of award, there's a period before you can get the green light to spend the money. And even after you get a notice of award and before you get the green light, anything you spend in that period is not reimbursable. The only thing reimbursable will start after you submit a contract, which you'll get, meet the terms and conditions of the contract. And it's basically the same across every community. There are instances where there is some state level requirements to do business with the state, because this is, and I didn't try to clarify it in this presentation because, but I'll say it now. The nonprofit is the sub-applicant in this program. The applicant is the state administrative agency. So that's why it's very important that everything runs through the state administrative agency. The application, the questions, the answers all come through the state. And it is the state that applies to FEMA on behalf of the nonprofit sub-applicants. In today's presentation, I just call nonprofits applicants, but because I don't want to confuse anybody. So don't remember this. I'm just letting you know that when you apply, you're applying through the state. So it is the state that's going to give you the green light. It's the state that's going to inform you of the result. It's the state where if you have, where you're going to submit for reimbursement. It's the state that you're going to submit your program implementation plan, which is a requirement, which is basically moving from an application to how's that application now going to work, transition to the steps of implementation. And we'll talk about implementation steps next week. So I totally lost what the question was because I kept talking.
No, it was the same. It was about the assessment.
Oh yeah.
It cannot be, yeah.
So nobody can expect to get a reimbursement for any cost incurred before they get the green light from their state administrative agency to begin spending money.
Okay. I have two questions here. One is that what month do we expect the announcement? Now, I don't know if it is the announcement for the 2022 grants or the 2023 application announcement time. So these two dates were not clarified on the question. I'm just guessing.
I can answer that.
And the other question, and the other question is, would this grant be for every year? Like, this is every year, because I know, we supported the increase in the grant. And I just want to let our audience know that USCMO, the U.S. Council of Muslim Organization, was the only Muslim organizations, along with other groups, Jewish groups and Christian groups, African-American churches and Sikhs and others. We signed the letter to Congress to increase funding started from 90 million to 180, then we went into more, and then this year to 360 million. And thanks to Rob, he was always contacting us and seeking our support with that, and we did. And I think it was very important that this money be given to places of worship, because unfortunately, there's a lot happening, and we do need to protect those places of worship. So is this like every year? Can they apply? Even if they got it the first year, they can apply for next year to pay for, let's say, a renewed contract with security groups, with updates of security cameras or something like that, or it's just one time? So actually, three questions.
Sure. First question. The FY 2022, that's the $250 million, of which just under 240 million was distributed in grant awards. The other remaining 12 million went to, for the first time since 2005, to help underwrite the administrative costs of the state administrative agencies, which is important. So that announcement was made in late summer, and FEMA makes the announcement generally. Then FEMA contacts every state administrative agency on a rolling basis between the summer and about now to let the state know what their results were, to let the state know, that there may be more information they need about a certain award or troubleshoot, but put everything together, and then they make the award announcements. And the rule requires that the state, once they are notified of the specific results from FEMA, has 45 days to notify the nonprofit. This year, there's a waiver involved because that unique identifier number I mentioned, which is a new requirement, didn't go as well as the government wanted. And there were about 300 of the 1,800 awardees that didn't have their unique ID numbers. So to protect the SAA from with canceling certain grants, that 45-day period, I believe, has been waived. But for the most part, if you applied and you haven't received a notification, it may be that you didn't succeed and your SAA won't, just doesn't notify those that don't succeed. It could be that they are still within their 45-day window. It could be that they haven't been notified yet. But I would just submit, if someone has a question about FY22, they should send that to us and I'll hunt it down. I'll figure out what the status is. For FY23, as I mentioned in my presentation, by law, Congress is supposed to complete the appropriations for the fiscal year before the fiscal year starts. The fiscal year began on October 1, and Congress, knowing it wasn't going to get the job done, gave itself an extension to December 16th to get the job done. Assuming they finish on time, meaning December 16th, the earliest the FY23 announcement from FEMA that starts the process would be on or about February 16th. Now, there are politics involved. It's an election year. There'll be a new Congress sworn in January. The power in the House in particular, but in both chambers, may switch. And because of that, there are some that may prefer to wait and delay until the next Congress is sworn in so that they can reconsider all the funding for every program, discretionary program of the United States government. If they do that, which they have done before, even this last year, that delay will result in a delay of when the nonprofit grant program process will start as well, because it cannot start until the federal funding is completed and the start times are written into law. So the dates basically are the initial date. FEMA must promulgate the application within 60 days of the appropriation finalization. After that 60 days, generally speaking, the SAA will have 30 days to make the application available to the nonprofits, have the nonprofits complete the application, submit it to them, do the first review, and then score, prioritize, and send their findings to FEMA for FEMA's multi-stage review. They typically give, when the SAAs have only 30 days, they typically give the nonprofit 7 days to 10 days to do the application, which is nothing. You can't successfully apply if you waited for the application period to start, to try to get a vulnerability assessment done, to try to get your estimates, vendor estimates, general investments, so that you can fill out your application. That just is not feasible. And that's why we're starting now, because if you start now, you could do the groundwork to get your vulnerability assessment done, to get your vendor estimates for the work to be done, in place. And then filling out the form becomes easy because then you have my step-by-step guidance to how do you answer every question in the IJ. What are the scenarios? What are the examples? How do you phrase it? What are the hints? Where do you get extra points? How do you avoid mistakes? We all help with that. And if you have the more time that you have to break down the process into digestible pieces, the easier it is for you to navigate this process. And then your third question related was,
if it is every year.
yes. So it's funny. FEMA unfortunately treats this program and has treated this program as if the current year is the last year it will happen. So they've never put in the infrastructure that we have always sought to make this a strong program. But as Mr. Jamal mentioned, that through his advocacy, joined with other interfaith groups, we've been able to increase the funding tenfold. Before 2017, the average annual appropriation for this program was $17 million for a national program. Did not go very far. Then, because of this outpouring of interfaith, intergroup effort, combined with a greater recognition among the country's leading law enforcement and counterterrorism agencies, plus I would say my and some of my colleagues who spent their time connecting the dots about this program for decision makers in Congress. This program is now one of the biggest, at least within the Department of Homeland Security, grant programs in existence. So we actually have a bill, an authorizing bill, not a spending bill, that when Congress comes back in November, we're hopeful Congress will pass, which will actually create a more permanent structure for a nonprofit security grant program that will help in its administration, its oversight, its resources and availability to nonprofits. So for those of you who have gotten a grant in the past, you are still welcome to apply again in the future, including this year. The scoring, though, will not give you the extra advantage in points. And this year it was 15 extra points if you had not previously received a grant. So at the end of the day, if you secured 40 points at the state level and 40 points at the national level for a total of 80 points, and then the national level decided you were a faith-based institution, so they multiplied that by 3 times, which I believe is 240 points, if my math is correct, Mr. Jamal.
Yeah.
And on top of that, if you're a first-time applicant, you would get an extra 15 points. So your total raw score would be 290.
Yeah.
Yeah, so you get it. So that's where, if you've been a prior applicant, you're at a disadvantage. But as I said, the more money that we secure for the program, the less impact that scoring advantage has, on the overall result. And if you're an organization that has, say, a police report of a specific threat or incident directly impacting them, that elevates in the discretion of FEMA and or the state administrative agency the importance of continuing to fund that applicant. And as I mentioned, applicants that are located in certain underserved communities, they also get up between a 10 and 15 additional point advantage. And that's just done by county. So that's just something that happens behind the scenes. There's nothing you can do in your application to impact that. Although I would say that, and I do advise that if you happen to be an organization, in your view, serves underserved communities, you would talk about that in your mission You would talk about that in your background. You would talk about that in your consequences section, because underserved communities tend to be more vulnerable and have a harder time recovering from incidents. So, I would talk about that. I would advise folks to talk about that in their applications, because I know the federal government really cares about that right now at this point in time, and that kind of policy view trickles into the process, the score and the scoring considerations. So that will be part of our strategy going forward when we're looking at applications and drafting applications, to talk about vulnerability, because of the community that you might be operating in.
Yeah, just like what happened, for instance, in Buffalo, New York, the attack on the supermarket. And, again, sometimes it opens a new communities that became subject to hate crimes and became vulnerable. So that will be coming now added to the mix, or expanded the location of such communities, under threat.
Well, and I'll make a connection for you. Let's talk about Buffalo. Maybe there was a mosque or an Islamic center within a block or two or around the corner from that supermarket. While the threat wasn't to that mosque or center, it was to a minority population. It was to an underserved community, and it was in proximity to that mosque or that center. So that would be something we would write about in the application under the threat section.
Yeah.
So, but the applicant may not know that, to be aware of that. So, we'll talk more about that next week.
Right. And that's why, for our audience, someone who is experienced as Mr. Rob Goldberg become very handy and very helpful to help and to guide those who would seek professional full attention to their program or to their applications. Next webinar, we will be talking about navigating. And then after that, those who would like to use the services, they can feel free to contact me, and then we can give them the full scope of what that special, contracted, kind of service that can be provided to them to help them do the application. As I mentioned, there would be 2 levels of that kind of service. We will talk about it for those who would like to seek that professional assistance. With that, I'm very grateful to Mr. Rob Goldberg for a wonderful presentation, an eye opener. Gave us a lot of understanding, a lot of information about the not-for-profit security grant program. Many do not know, some know, but there are always questions that we didn't know the answers to them. Today, we've been able to get those answers, and also an eye-opener for some of the sections in the application, for some of the categories, some of the requirements, some of the things that you can, you cannot, and why sometimes we did not get the grant. I think Mr. Goldberg would be even glad to go over those applications to see, okay, that's where you had a problem with, and that's something that can help you, with the next applications. With that, thank you, all of you. Feel free to send us your questions if you did not get a chance to send us any today, and we would be glad to get those answers for you, and we will share with you also today's presentation. Thank you all.